I never thought I'd end up sitting for hours under a lamp in my son's studio, posing for charcoal sketches. But when Daniel asked me to model for his final art project, I didn't hesitate, though I wanted to. I remember looking at myself in the mirror that evening, searching for the version of me I used to recognize. The woman with a spark in her eye, full of plans, full of laughter. She felt distant now, faded under the years of routine, responsibility, and silent sacrifices. It's about finding real beauty, Daniel said, brushing paint onto a fresh canvas. Not magazine beauty. You. His words, so casually sincere, hit something deep inside me. I smiled and agreed, not because I believed him, but because he believed it so effortlessly. The first day I posed, I felt awkward. I didn't know where to put my hands, how to hold my expression. I was sure the lines around my eyes, the softness in my arms, would make the art look tired. But Daniel didn't pause, didn't frown. He worked with quiet focus, occasionally glancing up to study my face like I was a mystery. He was eager to understand. I thought I'd feel judged, but all I felt was seen. At first, our conversations were light. He'd tell me about school deadlines, his frustration with shading certain angles, how the coffee in the studio was terrible. But slowly his words shifted. He spoke about how I used to sing while cooking when he was younger, how he missed that. He said he remembered me dancing in the kitchen when we had no money but tried to stay happy for him. I hadn't known he remembered those things. Each day I sat for him, I felt something unexpected. Healing. It was quiet, almost unnoticeable. But it was there in the way my son looked at me, not with pity or impatience, but with admiration. Like I mattered. Like I still had value beyond my roles as a mother, a divorcee, a woman who chose safety over excitement for the sake of stability. Once he stepped back from his easel, eyes narrowed, and said, "There's something about your expression today. It's stronger." I hadn't felt particularly different, but maybe I was beginning to believe in myself again, even just a little. I never told him how nervous I was about being his subject, how I feared not living up to his vision. But each time I sat down and saw how gently he sketched the curve of my cheek or the tilt of my smile, a piece of that fear fell away. What started as a favor slowly turned into something else. A mirror, not for how I looked, but for who I still was underneath everything I'd forgotten. I didn't realize it at the time, but this project, his school assignment, was quietly stitching something back together inside me. And I hadn't even seen the full painting yet. The more I sat for Daniel, the more I began to feel like I wasn't just being studied, I was being rediscovered. There was something deeply intimate about the silence between us, broken only by the soft scratch of pencil or the occasional question about my childhood or favorite color. He was learning who I was outside the framework of being his mother. I was learning too. One afternoon, Daniel introduced me to his mentor, Mr. Raymond. He was soft-spoken, with kind eyes and a patient way of observing everything without interrupting. He complimented Daniel's work, then looked at me with a quiet nod and said, "You carry emotion in your face. That's rare." I wasn't sure how to respond, so I smiled politely, but something about his tone made it feel like he wasn't just being nice. He meant it. Over the next few sessions, Mr. Raymond stopped by more often. Sometimes he gave Daniel feedback. Other times he lingered and chatted. He asked me about books I liked, what kind of music I listened to when I was younger, whether I still dreamed of things for myself. I was caught off guard by the questions. No one had asked me things like that in years. I found myself telling him about how I once wanted to be a writer, how I used to stay up late filling journals with stories that no one read. He listened, not politely, but fully, like every detail mattered. The more we talked, the more I noticed how easy it was to smile around him. His presence was calming. He never rushed the moment, never filled silence with unnecessary words. There was a kind of stillness in him that made space for honesty. He didn't try to impress. He simply showed up with his quiet wisdom, his worn-out sketchbook, and a way of looking at the world that felt tender. One day, Daniel had to leave early, and Mr. Raymond offered to stay back while I finished posing. I hesitated, unsure how it would feel, but agreed. He didn't pick up a pencil, didn't try to draw. Instead, he just sat nearby and asked if it ever got lonely being strong for everyone else. That question lingered in the air longer than I expected. I didn't answer right away. Eventually, I said yes. He didn't offer cliches or advice. He just nodded like he understood from experience. Later, I found out his wife had passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. He didn't talk about it in detail, but there was a gentleness in the way he said her name. I respected that silence. Our conversations grew naturally from art to life to small moments that somehow carried weight. He noticed when I got a new haircut, remembered that I liked chamomile tea, once brought me a book he thought I'd enjoy. All small gestures, but they landed deeply. I didn't know what to call this slow connection forming between us. It was a romance, not yet, but it was something. A kind of warmth I hadn't felt in a very long time. Something that made me look forward to the next conversation. Something that made me feel like I might still have chapters left to live. The day of the gallery opening arrived sooner than I expected. Daniel had been working tirelessly, perfecting every detail, making final adjustments with the kind of focus I'd only seen in him once before, when he was learning to ride a bike and refused to give up until he could go all the way down the street without falling. That same determination was in his eyes now, but it was no longer about proving something to himself. It was about sharing something with the world. When we entered the exhibition space, I felt a strange mixture of pride and vulnerability. I was part of his project, his vision. People would see me not as his mother, not as a woman doing groceries or cleaning floors, but as a subject of art. I had no idea how I would feel seeing myself through his eyes, on a wall, under lights, in front of strangers. I walked past the other exhibits until I reached Daniel's section. And then I stopped. There I was, not just one portrait, but a series. Each one captured something different. One held my stillness, another my tiredness. One showed a slight smile I didn't even remember giving. But the final piece, larger, centered, framed in a subtle gold, stilled everything in me. It wasn't just my face. It was my story. The way he shaded the shadows beneath my eyes, the fine lines at the corners of my mouth, the slight tilt of my shoulders. It wasn't unkind. It was truthful and beautiful, like he had taken every hidden part of me and given it space to exist without apology. People walked by and paused, studying the work. Some whispered, some took photos. One woman looked at me, then back at the portrait, then nodded slightly like she understood. I felt exposed, yet oddly at peace. Not because I looked flawless, I didn't, but because I looked real. And real, somehow, had become enough. Mr. Raymond found me standing there. He didn't say much at first, just looked at the painting, and then at me. Then softly, he said, "You're more than a subject in that frame. You're the soul of it." That simple sentence unraveled something in me, not in a dramatic way, just quietly, like a door opening after being shut for years. Later, when Daniel was asked to speak about his work, he stood nervously in front of the crowd. He thanked everyone, then said, "I wanted to show that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just gets up, keeps going, and loves without asking for anything back. That's my mom. That's this project." There were claps. A few people teared up. I couldn't move. After the event, people approached me with kind words, but what stayed with me most was what Mr. Raymond said before he left that evening. He looked at me, not through me, and said, "You helped bring Daniel's vision to life. But in the process, you brought something back to mine too." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. It's been 6 months since the gallery, but the night still lives in my memory like a favorite song. Unexpected, soothing, and hard to forget. Life didn't suddenly change with fanfare. It shifted quietly, like a gentle tide pulling me toward a version of myself I had known was still reachable. Daniel left for college a few weeks after the exhibition. Saying goodbye was hard, but it didn't carry the ache I thought it would. He was happy, confident, and proud. I could see it in the way he hugged me longer than usual, in the way he thanked me, not just for posing, but for believing in him. I realized then that the art wasn't just his project. It was our bridge, and we'd crossed it together. After he left, I found myself with time I hadn't had in years. Time to sit still, time to wonder, time to feel. I started writing again, not with any purpose, just because it felt good. Pages filled with thoughts I used to push aside. Memories, questions, even small observations like how the morning light touched the windowsill differently now. I wasn't chasing anything. I was just listening to myself again. Mr. Raymond and I continued to talk. At first, through short messages, then calls, then weekly visits. He invited me to a reading at a small library once, then a music night at a quiet cafe. It never felt like dating. It felt like returning, like finding someone who already knew your silences and didn't need to fill them. There was no grand confession, no dramatic kiss, just presence. A steady rhythm of showing up, asking how the day was, remembering small details. He once brought me a notebook with a leather cover, said he thought it might make writing feel more special. I smiled, touched by the thoughtfulness. I hadn't expected this at my age, to feel seen without trying, loved without asking. One morning, we sat together on a bench, drinking coffee, and watching the world go by. He turned to me and said, "I used to think love was something you chase, but maybe it's just something you make room for." I didn't reply. I just reached for his hand, and he didn't let go. It wasn't about starting over. It was about continuing with open eyes. I no longer see myself as a faded version of who I used to be. I see someone full of stories still unfolding. Someone who raised a good man, who allowed herself to be vulnerable, who found companionship not in perfection but in honesty. Love, as I've come to understand it, doesn't always enter with a spark. Sometimes it arrives quietly, dressed in kindness, wrapped in conversations and shared silences. It doesn't ask you to change. It asks you to be. I once agreed to model for my son's art project, thinking it was just a favor, but it turned into something far more unexpected, a portrait of who I really was, a reunion with my forgotten self, and a new beginning I never thought I'd have.